Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the 118th Annual General Meeting of the British Standards Institution. The safety of our colleagues, members and others is our priority, and this year, due to the coronavirus outbreak, we've sadly been unable to invite members and guests to join us in person at our offices in London. We are, however, extremely pleased to have members and guests join us for the AGM online for the very first time. While the format of this meeting is different to that of previous years, we want to reflect the usual structure of our AGM as closely as possible. And in a few moments, I'll introduce a presentation by the Chief Executive Officer, Howard Kerr, covering the group's activities in 2019 and its prospects for 2020. This will be followed by a presentation by the Director of Standards, Scott Steedman, on maintaining the relevance of British standards. After the presentation, you'll be given the opportunity participate as you usually would by asking questions of the board. This will be done using the Lumi platform. Those attending via the online platform may ask questions via the Lumi AGM app or website by typing and submitting their questions in writing. To do so, select the messaging icon from within the navigation bar and type your question in the box at the bottom of the messaging screen. Once finished, press the send icon to the right of the messaging box to submit your question. I shall read your question aloud before providing an answer. Anyone attending the meeting is eligible to ask questions. Messages can be submitted at any time during the Q&A session up until I close the session. Questions in the AGM online platform will be moderated before being sent to me to avoid repetition. Please make one note, please clearly give your name and organisation at the head of your question. Before I hand over to give his presentation, I'd like to take a few moments to make a few introductions. My name is John, Chairman of the Board and Chair of the Nominations Committee. Joining me in BSI's offices in Chiswick today are Howard Kerr, Chief Executive, along with our General Counsel and Company Secretary, Gráinne Brankin. Online, our two other Executive Directors, Scott Steedman, Director of Standards, and Craig Smith, our Finance Director. Also online, joining us, Douglas Hurt, Non-Executive Director and Chair of the Audit Committee, Stephen Page, Non-Executive Director who is the Board's representative on the Standards Policy and Strategy Committee and Chair of the Sustainability Committee, formerly known as the Social Responsibility Committee. Alison Wood, Non-Executive Director and Chair of the Remuneration Committee, and Ian Lobley, Non-Executive Director. Next, I must introduce Tiffany Hall, who is joining us online today. Tiffany joined as Non-Executive Director last month. Tiffany is currently a Non-Executive Director and Remuneration Committee Chair for B&M European Value Retail SA and a Non-Executive Director of Symington Family Estates. BSI will benefit from her experience of transformation, brand and key account management. Welcome, Tiffany. I'd also like to take the opportunity to mention Lucinda Richards, who was our Senior Independent Director until she stepped down today at the end of her 9-year term. On behalf of the board, I'd like to thank Lucinda very sincerely for the dedication and energy with which she has served BSI over the past 9 years. She has been a counsel to me over my first year as chairman, and we will all miss her contribution. I'd also like to mention some other people who are joining us online. Present online and representing our auditors, PricewaterhouseCoopers, is Owen McAney, Audit Partner. Members of the BSI Standards Policy and Strategy Committee. Present online today is Dan Biles, who was appointed as Committee Chair on the 1st of July 2019. And then there are a number of Standards Policy and Strategy Committee members who, because of their number, I won't mention individually, but you're all welcome. As we're unable to have a quorum together in person today, I'm going to hand to our Company Secretary, Gráinne Brankin, to explain the procedure before I open the formal business of the meeting. Gráinne.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. In accordance with Article 42 of our bylaws, no business shall be transacted at a general meeting unless 10 persons entitled to attend and vote are present in person. As this is obviously not possible today due to restrictions, In order to ensure this meeting is validly held, we'll follow the procedure which is set down in Article 42B of our bylaws. This means we're required to wait half an hour, which will be until around 4:30, at which point the chairman will declare the meeting adjourned for just 5 minutes. We're then required to wait a further 15 minutes, whereupon the members present at the time shall constitute a quorum. Accordingly, at around 4:50, we will treat this meeting as quorate with the members present and proceed with the formal business of the meeting.
Thank you, Grania. So in accordance with Article 42B, I declare the meeting shall be adjourned until 4:35 today. Now, this procedure is designed to meet circumstances where, for example, people are late and may seem an unwieldy step in the current circumstances. It does, however, be the only mechanism open to us. But we're not asking people to waste time just hanging around before we start the formal AGM business. Indeed, in the meantime, I'm going to ask Howard Kerr to give a brief overview of our 2019 performance and prospects for 2020. Howard.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our members, colleagues and partners of BSI. I'm going to talk briefly about another very successful year in the long history of BSI in 2019. But before that, I'm sure that everybody on this call would like to hear about the current situation in BSI and our prospects for the coming months, given the situation that we're in at the moment. So if I could ask for the first slide, please. I'm going to talk about our COVID-19 response, current situation and future prospects, remind ourselves and our members and people attending this call of the longer term purpose and strategy for BSI, explain in more detail the 2019 highlights, financial and otherwise, for the organisation, a review of our business performance relative to the market and competitors, and then briefly an outlook for not just the remainder of 2020, but for the duration of our ongoing 5-year plan. So our next slide, please. COVID-19 clearly is front of mind for all organisations, as it has been for many, many months, and BSI is no different. Throughout this crisis, our primary focus has been and will continue to be the safety of our employees and our clients, and ensuring that not only our people, but also our clients are able to maintain effectiveness throughout some very significant organisational disruption, to support our people and support the wider community that have come to depend upon BSI's products and services. This is not a small endeavour under the circumstances, but I have to say I'm incredibly impressed at the way in which my colleagues at BSI have transitioned very, very quickly to a very, very different way of working. It is a fact that the majority of BSI employees around the world already work remotely from home, but typically on site with clients. About 60% of BSI people work outside of a home or office on a day-to-day basis. So it is something that we're reasonably familiar with as an organization, but even our on-site client people are now having to work full-time from home, as of course are our people not traditionally based in offices. The only people in BSI of any substance that have not had to change their way of working are the people in our laboratories, who are obviously working doing very important work, particularly in the area of PPE. So BSI has managed to successfully transition from a site and office-based organisation to a remote, digitally enabled organisation, and has shown tremendous agility and dynamism, as have our clients and other stakeholders who are also having to work with us to ensure that their operations are resilient through this current situation. To help organisations who depend on BSI, we have made a number of our standards, and Scott will talk about this later, to help particularly organisations that are considering for the first time to manufacture medical devices and PPE equipment in the UK and overseas. And a large number of relevant standards have been made available free of charge to help those organisations understand the essential health and safety and performance requirements. At the same time, business standards, particularly in the area of business continuity and risk management, are also freely available to those organisations who are not just having to survive and prevail through the current crisis, but also want to ensure that their organisation is fit for purpose for the future. So BSI is making that information available to help our clients with the knowledge to think through and manage the situation, and also, where possible, take advantage of some opportunities that are arising as a result of the current situation. What's interesting, one of the noticeable changes in BSI, and some of you on the call may have noticed this already, is actually some of the early work that we had done through 18 and 19 around creating new virtual and innovative solutions for our clients have actually been accelerated and deployed in the market in very, very quick time. So the vast majority of our management systems audits, for example, and consulting assignments are now done remotely with the approval of the relevant accreditation bodies. Equally, our training services are being provided exclusively now online through a product called Connected Learning Live. And our standards committees continue to perform their invaluable work, but are doing this in a virtual setting as well. And I'm sure that many of these innovations will prove not just to be temporary solutions, that many of these will actually become a fundamental part of our long-term working. And I'm very pleased with the way that our partners and our clients have responded positively to this situation. Having said that, despite all the work that we've done organizationally and with innovation and servicing our clients and protecting our people, it is inevitable, given the scale of the COVID-19 impact, that it will have an impact on our 2020 financial results. As you'll see in a minute, BSI went into this crisis in a strong financial situation. And whilst we do expect our revenue this year to be broadly in line by the end of the year with 2019, but no growth, there will be an impact on profitability. So the focus at the moment is cash conservation to ensure the long-term future of BSI by ensuring that we have the financial capacity, not just to ride the storm, but also to fulfill our longer-term mission. The next slide, please. Earlier this year, we launched a new statement of BSI's purpose, mission, and values. For a successful organization that we have been for nearly 120 years, we asked ourselves at the board last year, really, why does BSI exist, and what purpose do we serve in the wider society and the wider economy? And you'll see here the statement that we've made, which defines our purpose: inspiring trust for a more resilient world. I don't think the world has ever been in need of greater trust, and BSI clearly stands out as an organization that people could come to for a trusted, honest opinion and advice. And resilience, little did we know it when we created this purpose, that the coronavirus was going to give us all, I suppose, the ultimate test of resilience, and I think therefore our purpose remains absolutely valid. And our mission to support people and organizations to become excellent hasn't changed, and our core values of integrity, the independence, an honest opinion and valued partnership that you get from working with BSI, the respect for our colleagues and our business partners and inclusion of BSI, and above all, the knowledge and expertise of our people remain core attributes of the organization. Next slide, please. 2 years ago, we signed up as a proud signatory of the United Nations Global Compact, but we wanted to go further in considering what inspiring trust for a more resilient world meant. We were very mindful of the drive across all of our stakeholders to develop a more sustainable world. Resilience, if you like, is an extension of the narrow definition of sustainability. And following the example set by the United Nations and their other signatories, we had a very close look at the Sustainable Development Goals. And whilst it's true to say that BSI absolutely has a role to play in supporting the delivery of all 17 of the goals, clearly we are an organization of finite resources. We've decided to focus in on 7 SDGs and demonstrate the capacity we have to help organizations that are particularly focused on delivering the outcomes in SDGs 3, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, enabled through our partnerships with industry, with government, with NGOs, with consumer groups, and with our business partners around the world. And increasingly, you'll see in BSI an increased focus and a linkage between BSI's activities and the outcomes that the United Nations has set out to do. And we welcome any suggestions and ideas that any of you may have as to how we might do that more effectively. I personally believe very, very strongly that COVID-19 should not distract us all from the long-term goal of creating a more sustainable world. The issues of climate change and social inequality have not gone away, and to some extent transcend the current pandemic, and it's important that we don't lose sight of these long-term strategic issues. Next slide, please. To remind people on the call of our long-term strategic goals, I shared this with the attendees at last year's AGM. Our 2024 strategic plan has not changed. We may have lost what I call a gap year in 2020. Some of our execution of the strategy plan will be delayed inevitably because of the disruption caused at the moment. But the long-term goals of establishing and reinforcing relevance of BSI to the modern world, of becoming an everly excellent, everly important commercial organization, delivering creative and effective solutions, not just products for our clients, transforming internally and externally our operations and our offering to our clients, and above all, having the best people that we can have, the most committed expert people who can really help shape BSI, but also help us shape the future of this organization for all of our stakeholders to benefit from. And last but not least, scale. If we're going to have the impact and the relevance that we believe that we should have as BSI, we have to be able to do that on a global scale. And to do that, we have to be able to build a much larger organization with more resources to serve a much wider stakeholder group. Next slide, please. In this slide, you'll see the goals that we set last year for 2024, the financial goals of the organization for revenue and underlying operating profit. Obviously, 2020 has not turned out the way it was expected in 2019. So you see a dip in the numbers, which means that the angle of growth from 2020 through to 2024 is clearly steeper than we originally anticipated. We will be reviewing this at the board later this year to determine whether the 2024 targets and beyond are still meaningful. But at the moment, it's with so much uncertainty about the 2020 outcome, we're just holding to those 2024 targets. But I wanted to put up this slide to emphasize the point that we're actually still remain very, very focused on the five-year plan. Next slide, please. So the 2019 highlights, which are there for everybody to see in the annual report, another strong year of global growth in revenue for the 20th consecutive years, supported by mostly organic growth, supported by a couple of small acquisitions in the United States and in New Zealand. But with and you'll see in the graph, a dip in profitability in 2019 after a fairly significant profit growth in 2016, 17 and 18. This was planned, it was budgeted for. 2019 was a heavy investment year for BSI in systems, in new people, in capacity to manage and develop our long-term growth. So very much a performance in line with plan, and those investments clearly that we made in 2019 are expected to accrue benefits for the future years. The big change in 2019 was reflecting the new organization structure we put in place in 2018, was a much stronger commercial model which linked together the various streams and geographies with a much stronger focus on our key sectors, particularly health and built environment, also food and supply chain, and other sectors as well, building global solutions across all the BSI streams with key accounts. And we now have a substantial commercial leadership team which was put fully in place in 2019. And from 2020 onwards, we do expect to see significant benefits from that. And actually, we are already seeing those benefits in 2020, notwithstanding the difficult trading circumstances that we have today. Next slide, please. So here you can see the summary of the numbers I've just talked about, a 7% increase in revenue, a 6% dip in underlying operating profit because of the accelerated investment in the program. But at the bottom line, healthy cash and net assets, which give us that very, very strong financial platform, which will not just help us manage our way through the current situation, but also provide the investment and confidence for the long-term sustainability of the British Standards Institution. Next slide, please. I always like to show this slide to remind ourselves and to remind all the people on the call that BSI is, although we're head office is domiciled in the UK, we're not a UK specific organization. We have healthy organizations growing now in Asia Pacific and in the Americas and in the rest of Europe and Middle East and Africa. In fact, approximately only 1/3 of BSI's revenue now accrues here in the UK. And we expect the non-UK part of the BSI revenue to grow even faster in the future, and the UK will continue to grow as well. So this slide just demonstrates the global reach of BSI and the increased internationalization of our offering to our stakeholders. Next slide, please. As a non-profit and dividend distributing organization, it's important to understand what happens to the profits and the cash that we generate. And you'll see here in 2019, the distribution not dissimilar to previous years. Ongoing payments into our final salary pension scheme to clear the legacy deficit, tax investments, as I've pointed out, significant investments in IT systems and training products and fixed assets and acquisitions, which clearly is consuming a large part of our cash throughout the year. At the end of the year, a healthy cash position, and I think a very positive and productive deployment of our surplus funds. Next slide, please. I mentioned the successful last decade for BSI. I think the lines are the CAGRs for revenue and underlying profit, notwithstanding the planned dip in profit in 2019, which I believe will drive the longer term growth, continued growth of our year-on-year revenue, but also the growth in our underlying operating profit, which will clearly enable BSI to discharge even more effectively its full purpose through creating additional financial resources, which we will smartly deploy into the market. Next slide, please. To remind people about how we're organized as a business, the organization structure that we put in place 2 years ago remains the bedrock of our business model. At the top, we have our global business streams, now organized into 4 business activities of knowledge, previously known as standards, assurance services, regulatory services, and consulting services. And as you see then, we see those 4 streams working individually and collectively, driving collective BSI solutions and products and services into key sectors such as health, food, built environment, and other sectors, aerospace, automotive are mentioned there specifically. It's quite a collaboration exercise. It does require a fundamental change of working. And a key part of that is making sure that we have our group functions of marketing, legal, HR, IT, and finance fully supporting our business partnership. And I have to say, all the foundations of the organization are now in place. And we are starting to see some very interesting case studies developing where clients are engaging with BSI in multiple geographies across multiple streams around particular areas of thought leadership and domain expertise. And you'll be seeing more and more of these case studies being publicized and promoted in future. Excuse me. Next slide, please. A split there of the revenue by the 4 business streams. I would highlight there the significant growth in regulatory services. This has been one of the great success stories of BSI in the last few years. As if not the leading notified body and approver of medical devices into the European market, BSI has been particularly successful and continues to invest and show thought leadership in that area. The growth of regulatory services and the recent addition through acquisition of consulting services has given BSI a much more balanced portfolio. We continue to invest and grow in knowledge and assurance services, but the 4 legs of BSI, I think, give us a very, very strong foundation for growth and client relationships going forward. Next slide, please. So very briefly, a quick summary of the individual streams. Knowledge was a challenging year. 2018 had been a year of significant growth in our publishing sales in particular, with the transition to the best-selling ISO 9000 and 14000 standards. The transition to those standards completed in 2018. So there was a slowdown in the rate of publishing growth, but equally compensated for by significant wins in our knowledge services activities, particularly with international project wins in countries like China and India, and also work that we've done in the UK government in innovative new areas such as connected autonomous vehicles. So all in all, a very pleasing performance by the knowledge team. Next slide, please. Assurance services was also facing a stiff challenge with the significant fall off in activity because of the end of the transition of ISO 9000 and 14001. The team responded remarkably well and actually only produced a small decline, but overall assurance services did manage to grow because of the strong performance of our product certification and our training businesses, a very healthy portfolio in assurance services. And at the same time, as we discussed last year, our product certification team successfully established a notified body in the Netherlands so we could continue to provide market access to product clients into the European Union post-Brexit. Next slide, please. I mentioned already regulatory services. What's driving that growth is not just BSI's commitment and investment to this critical activity, but the change in regulations, the medical devices and IVDR regulations, which were supposed to be coming in force this year. The MDR has now been extended for next year. But we're very committed to supporting our clients through this very complex, demanding transition. The team are working extremely hard, and we did this at the same time whilst also moving our notified body for access to the EU over to the Netherlands. That process is now successfully completed, and all our clients who wanted to transition to the notified body in the Netherlands have successfully done so. 2020 will be a year of equal investment into this important part of our activities. Next slide, please. Consulting services, the relative new kid on the block for BSI, a difficult year for consulting services. It's a new activity for BSI. All of these activities came to us through acquisition, and the last 3 years we've been busy integrating those businesses into BSI and making sure that we understand really not just how to operate these businesses, but how they link and connect to the rest of BSI and become a full part of the BSI family. And 2020 very much is having made some difficult decisions around structure. Excuse me, we're much clearer now about the role of these activities, and clearly activities such as health and safety in a COVID-19 situation and the increasing demand for cybersecurity services means that we're well placed for future growth. So key challenge for 2020 is to make sure that our consulting services deliver value to our clients and support our clients through a very difficult period in these two areas of environmental health and safety, sustainability and cybersecurity. Next slide, please. So a final slide. It's very difficult to outlook anything at the moment with so much uncertainty around, but hopefully you get a sense from my presentation of the resilience of BSI today, but also the confidence that we have in our future, the undoubted strength of our brand and reputation, and the breadth and depth of our portfolio, and the trust that organisations put in BSI, I think has never been greater. The work that we're doing at the moment, for example, here in the UK to support the UK government and industry in bringing PPE and medical devices to the market is a very good example of how BSI can really deliver real impact and value, and is very committed to providing this in the interest of the many. The role of the National Standards Body has never been more important. We continue to fully support Her Majesty's Government and UK business, not just here in the UK, but increasingly internationally as well. And Scott will talk about how that is manifesting itself in a minute. Yes, COVID-19 is certainly a challenge. It's certainly one of the hardest challenges I've had to face in my business career, but I'm confident that we as an organisation will come out of this even stronger, having demonstrated our commitment to our stakeholders and our value, and adapt to a new way of working. We are not going to go back to working exactly the same way we did before. We've had some really good learnings in the last couple of months, and we want to lock those into the business, using technology, being more creative, but above all, as we've done for nearly 120 years, make sure that BSI is here for the long term, not just for ourselves, but actually in the interest of all of our stakeholders. So I very much look forward to continuing with all of our members, partners and colleagues on this journey. So without further ado, I'm going to hand back to John. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard. As I said, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end of the next presentation. And I'm now going to ask our Director of Standards, Scott Steedman, to give his presentation on maintaining the relevance of British standards. Scott.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Howard, for that. I'll keep an eye on the clock, John, but if there's anything I need to do to speed up, let me know. Delighted to be able to talk to you all this afternoon about our work over the past year to maintain and indeed to enhance the relevance of British standards. Thank you. Next slide. I thought, first of all, though, I really ought to say a few words to follow Howard to explain in a bit more detail how we are responding to support the national effort against COVID-19. We've got a lot of work going on, but perhaps first of all to point out that actually all our committees are now working online. I'm very grateful to all of them for the way in which they have pivoted into that mode. Online working is fairly normal, but of course, actually the face-to-face part of our activity is also pretty vital. So they have moved seamlessly into that. Our team is supporting that, and that's part of the international standards effort across the ISO and IEC and CEN, CENELEC and ETSI communities of international standards making. We're monitoring all that, but it's going pretty smoothly. We have made a lot of standards available free to download online. That again was part of an international effort, industry and governments around the world, certainly across Europe, pushing hard to have access to standards. Over 70, in fact now over 90 standards. Recently, standards on in vitro diagnostic test kits and medical devices have been added to that list, which covers ventilators and PPE hygiene products and business continuity, all available. And to date, in fact, today's figure, I think, is over 78,000 downloads of those standards and over 77,000 visited pages. I was interested to see that nearly half of those were in fact on business continuity and just about a third on the subject of PPE. We've worked closely with the Emergency Planning College, part of the Cabinet Office Civil Contingencies Secretariat, to deliver business continuity webinars, and over 1,500 people have participated in those, and there have been a further 1,700 YouTube views of those webinars. So that's all been a very good outreach to support people. And we're working across the group with our experts, technical experts from our notified body, medical devices, to carry out product technical file reviews and quality management audits strictly within the rapidly manufactured ventilator system derogation procedures that have been introduced recently for the crisis. A lot of work going on directly with BSI, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and the Office of Product Safety and Standards, OPSS, which I'll refer to again later, the Department of Health and Social Care, of course, Cabinet Office, the Foreign Office, and embassies and high commissions around the world, where trade officers are out searching for manufacturers to support the UK at this time. So we've been working very closely with them to try and help clarify what's required from a standards perspective and the approvals processes. And we're sharing all that best practice with our Commonwealth and global partners, and I'll come back to that later on. Next slide. 3 guides we've published online, and I encourage you to take a look at them if you haven't already. These are on very specific issues that have arisen in the last few weeks. Firstly, on the question of PPE products being made by non-PPE manufacturers, so new companies turning to try and support the PPE effort, and indeed volunteers trying to make PPE products. Guidance for the trade officers that I've mentioned to try and explain the landscape and the structures of standards and approvals, and a specific guide there on the right hand side on the masks and face coverings and the different sorts of masks and face coverings that have been discussed in the media and in the public debate around protecting people and frontline health workers. So we will add to these and update them as time goes on. I feel it's an important part of our ambition to help the public, to help industry, and to support government. If I turn to the engine room of the organisation, next slide please, publishing, and I'd like just to thank my colleague Shirley Bailey-Wood. We've worked together for many years now, and Shirley's absolutely instrumental in delivering the knowledge stream for BSI. I'm very appreciative of her effort. And pick out some of the highlights from last year. This really illustrates for me the range and extraordinary sort of breadth of the work that we get involved with. And I've picked out fairly obviously, first of all, a medical devices standard published last year on the application of risk management. This is recognized by the regulatory authorities in the US, in Canada, and in Europe. And then 2 really exciting British standards, big data standards. These are not international standards yet. They've been developed with a UK perspective in mind on the guidance of big data for organizations and for projects. And you contrast that with the first ever tattooing standard, BSEN 17169 on safe and hygienic practices, designed to help tattooists and industry and government regulators to promote safety for both the tattooist and clients. And there may well be a standard that we need to reflect on in the post-COVID era. I mentioned last year the success that the UK's had in achieving the secretariat of the new ISO committee, TC322, on sustainable finance. And we've just published PAS in that area, which is part of a 5-year program of work on sustainable finance supported by BSI, which is working in parallel with the ISO standards development work. That's a really exciting initiative, and I feel, following Howard's comments about the Sustainable Development Goals, that if there is a something that comes out of our post COVID world in the renewal phase. Maybe we will see this convergence of interest towards recovery, renewal in a sustainable way. And perhaps this activity on sustainable finance, which is led by the UK, will be pivotal in achieving a more global commitment towards sustainable investment and sustainable responsibility in organizations. Two particular standards I'm calling out here on innovation. One is in the connected autonomous vehicles area, guidelines for control systems. This is part of the BAY's work with CCAV, the Centre for Connected Autonomous Vehicles. And very recently, there's powers on responsible innovation. Been some years in the making. We've been thinking very hard about how we could support innovators to act in a responsible manner to build up public confidence in what they're doing in academic facilities and industrial units. And this is a very exciting new development. Next slide. Just thought I'd focus perhaps a little bit on the built environment, because our other interests continue to grow. One of the most important publications that we made last year was this revision to a well-respected standard, BS 8414, on the test method for fire performance of cladding systems. And that was launched post-Grenfell following industry feedback and with the collective agreement of our committee and the department, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, MHCLG. So part one is on cladding for masonry faces of a building, and part two on cladding for structural steel frames. So an important piece of work there post-Grenfell. And indeed, on that second bullet there, in professional competency standards, this is also a post-Grenfell landscape piece of work, which has been stimulated by Dame Judith Hackett's review to try and raise the bar in terms of professional competence in the built environment. And what's important about this is it shows the relationship between industry standards supporting government policy in terms of the delivery of the new Building Safety Act, which will be this year. The building information modelling journey continues. It started with the PAS 1192 series, now in ISO, of course, and these two new parts on security-minded approach and operational phase will be published this year. And there's a lot of very exciting work going on with the Centre of Digital Built Britain around the UK BIM framework website. This is a new initiative for BSI where we're trying to build wider communities of interest in areas of technical interest above and beyond our standards committee groups, so reaching out as far as possible. A few words, next slide please, a few words perhaps about restructuring our standards development function. Last year we introduced a new system, a new structure with 3 teams where we had a separate focus on operations on committees and sectors working closely together in a collaboration. And by calling out the operations team separately from committees and sector, it just means that we have a team that can really focus on modernizing our systems and processes separately from the committee managers who have more time to devote to their committee members and stakeholders, and separately again, of course, from the sector team. I just flag at this point that I think diversity and inclusivity remains a really high and urgent priority for us. We have nearly 13,000 committee members, and we hugely appreciate the work they put in, but we need many more actually, and we need more diversity amongst that community. We have a new initiative which we call Inclusive as Standard, and we've created an advisory panel to help refresh our policies in this area. And we're not alone. Other standards bodies are also wrestling with how to make their committees more diverse and inclusive, but I'm just determined that we really must make progress in this area as fast as possible. Next slide. The dedicated sector team under Anne Hayes' leadership has given us a real opportunity to dedicate more time to working with our major industry sectors, and her team's developed a new approach towards sectors here. We've labelled them as established and developing and core, and that gives us really a big opportunity to put the right amount of emphasis on these sectors as they reach different levels of maturity. Next slide, please. I spend a few minutes now talking a little bit about standard services and policy. We've got some remarkable standard services projects in progress, which we're very excited about. And this particular one is supported by the Foreign Office Prosperity Fund on the China business environment. 3 important outcomes here where we're able to work with our opposite number in China in the ministry to improve the adoption and use of international standards in China, something that we're very UK friendly, to support the quality of Chinese proposals. So we're working in this cooperative international environment rather than working in protectionist national spaces, and to improve the understanding and the economic and social impact of international standards adoption in China, all of which is all going to lead to sustainable economic development of that country, and indeed all the lessons that we can take from that to other parts of the world as well. Next slide. Just 4 specific call-outs here, programs that we're working on in the innovation space, in the services team with the Department for Business, BAYS, the CCAV work I've already mentioned on connected autonomous vehicles, the Faraday Challenge to help the UK battery industry, digital twins I've mentioned, and energy smart appliances, also part of the Sustainable Development Programme, to see whether the hydrogen economy can be exploited through the use of standards, and how smart appliances will help us in the home. These programs are going to run through to 2021, and they're a very important part of our innovation team's work. Next slide. And finally, in this space, the agile capability that we have been pioneering over the last year, first delivered the CAV vocabulary standard that you see there on the screen. We see this new cooperative working platform as a tool that we want to be able to embed not only as a discrete output itself to develop agile solutions, but also to actually enhance and speed up our PAS process and our formal British standards cycle time. So all of this is innovating to try and improve the way in which we can deliver digitally standards in a fast and effective way with a wider and wider community. Digital transformation, next slide, is a key part of our ambition. We need to keep upgrading and reforming our tools. And on the next slide, you'll see part of that strategy. The development process itself, so replacing our e-committees platform, working on document management and community, removing the boundaries. Enriching content, a fundamental part of the next 5 years, is going to be allowing us to develop content for users in a more accessible way. We need to be digital first with our XML tools, and we need really to improve our proposition to our users, how they access standards, how they discover them, how they can take them up in their companies as well. This diagram on the next slide is sometimes referred to as a bit of a Star Wars diagram, but part of that digital transformation, we just want to illustrate the wide range of digital projects that are taking us from where we are today to our vision for a digital future. So replatforming our digital services to be extensible and flexible, able to interact with customers and partners, transforming our collaboration, how we author and collaborate on standards, transforming standards themselves into machine readable and machine interpretable formats, which we will see within the next few years, and moving to a community tools, a community first approach, where our users are driving what we do through collaboration tools. This is a massive transformation for us, which is why we have such a focus on the investment in our digital technologies. Turning to government, our next slide. Okay, thank you very much. So just continuing with a few words about our engagement with government, really important part of our activity is to support the different departments, the devolved administrations and the devolved nations and their industries. We've been working very closely, of course, with BAYS and OPSS, who I've mentioned repeatedly, FCO, but also DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, Department for International Development and for International Trade. So these departments are really critical to our international strategy around the use of standards. The 2019 general election, not 2020 of course, 2019 general election saw quite significant changes in government and its policies towards the EU exit, which has meant we've had to reflect on that as a national standards body, and ministerial changes continue to happen then, but also since, and most recently in the Department of International Trade, where I'm on the STAG, the Strategic Trade Advisory Group, and that minister has changed in the last week. So things moving quite rapidly within government, but our staff secondments into both BEIS and DIT were very successful, and we'd like to continue to do that in future. Next slide. Just a couple of words on our EU exit post-transition. We recognise that our stakeholders remain committed to a coherent and consistent national catalogue. We need to work to support those stakeholders, that's industry, consumers, and also government, to meet their needs for market access globally. We also need to recognise that UK, with its autonomous UK regulatory policy post-transition, also will need support in order to provide a coherent catalogue of British standards to support British regulation. And so we need to resolve that with our European neighbours in the Sensenelec system, and indeed to support the Northern Ireland withdrawal agreement protocol, and to make all of these parts of the jigsaw work together. We're very confident we can do that. There are a lot of moving parts, and COVID-19 has certainly added to the complexity of the picture, but I think that quietly and behind the scenes a lot of discussion going on, which I'm optimistic will lead to the right result. We will continue to maintain the influence that we have exerted historically in the European regional standards, and of course in the international standard space. Next slide, and final section. International influence. China has been a huge part of our strategy. Our bilateral relationship with China has been really, really important. And the first ministerial meeting that we held in BEIS, on the next slide, led to the signing of a new MOU, which has strengthened our UK-China Standardization Cooperation Commission, on the next slide, where we're helping to provide advice on China's 2035 strategy. That was the first time that we had the minister, my opposite number, in BEIS to meet our minister, and it was a very successful part of the relationship building process. I was privileged to be re-elected as Vice President Policy of ISO, which will continue through to the end of 2021. And we are doing a lot of work within the ISO and IEC governance structures to influence their strategic direction. ISO has already anchored its future strategy to the Sustainable Development Goals. And as Howard described that earlier, we see that as a critical part of our work within BSI. Lots going on gender responsive standards and standards development. And indeed, of course, we haven't forgotten, we will not forget, that we are planning for the ISO week to be held physically in London in September 2021. We expect that the ISO General Assembly this year in the Middle East will not be happening. So the London 2021 event will be the first face-to-face meeting for 2 years of the ISO community. And finally, I'd like to call out the Commonwealth Standards Network, this extraordinary project which has been going from strength to strength, launched in 2018, now includes, I think, 99% of intra-Commonwealth trade. 50 of the 54 Commonwealth states are members of the CSN, and it was given a very high rating by UK government in its recent annual review audit. Been funded by UK aid to date. Phase 1 was over 4 million, phase 2 over 2 million, and we look forward to seeing that programme of work continuing. Right now, the team are working to pivot the activity to respond to COVID-19 across the Commonwealth, and to try and share those lessons and learnings. And we think the CSN may well be a vehicle that government will want to use in the post-COVID recovery and renewal phase to see the use of standards building back both globally and to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So as every year, let me just close by saying thank you very much again to our committee members, to all our chairs, and to everyone who works for us and with us on this extraordinary journey. Next slide, and thank you very much. And back to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Scott, and well done for keeping going through the gap. We'd now be happy to take any questions from members and guests online, and I'll call on my board colleagues to assist with answers as needed. Please ask questions on the Lumi AGM app or website by typing and submitting questions in writing. To do so, as I said before, select the messaging icon from within the navigation bar and type your question in the box at the bottom of the messaging screen. Once finished, press the send icon to the right of the messaging box to submit your question. I'll read each question aloud before providing an answer or asking somebody else to provide it. Anyone attending the meeting is eligible to ask questions. And just a gentle reminder, please don't forget to put your name and organisation at the beginning. And I'm pleased to have the first question. And Scott, this is coming to you, and it's from Robert Garbutt, Chief Executive of Drone Major Group and the Chairman of ACE 20. And it reads as follows: funding for the BSI experts representing the UK and BSI has never been sufficient to cover the costs associated with international travel to meetings to represent the committee, BSI, or the UK, such as ISO plenaries. But in the light of the effect that COVID-19 will have on the ability of experts to continue to bridge the gap, especially given the inevitable increase in international travel as the aviation industry tries to recover, what steps are BSI taking to ensure that the experts on which they rely for the quality of their work are continue to represent them internationally? If you don't mind taking that one, please.
Well, thank you very much, Rob. Thank you, John. Yes, I mean, this is a perennial challenge for all our industry experts to participate, whether it's virtually or physically, to find the time, to find the resources for their companies to support them, or in some cases for themselves. There is the ACE scheme, as you say, Rob. It doesn't cover the full cost of international travel. It's a government fund. We're very lucky in the UK to have that fund at all. We haven't had any conversations with BEIS about the future of the ACE fund in a post-COVID environment, but I respect your question and your point that costs of flight travel, if indeed it's possible, will increase, and that will put additional pressure on our expert base reaching faraway committee meetings. I have to say it's going to be the same for other countries too. Many other countries, their standards bodies actually expect their experts to pay for the privilege of participating in the standards work themselves. We maintain a policy where we want experts to participate free of charge. We want to provide that facility for you to influence the standards that you need. And we do our best with the managing the ACE scheme to try and partially support the cost of some people's travel who are eligible for that scheme. There's no real answer to this, Rob. I mean, the costs of travel are going to be the cost of travel, and it's going to be just how important this work is to you. I would hope that within ISO and IEC, I mean, setting the European regional work to one side, big costs are probably in the global travel. I would hope that ISO and IEC, putting my Vice President hat on, will continue to use virtual meetings as much as possible. But this is a question which is asked actually even more vocally by the developing country experts, who say it's impossible for us to travel because we simply have no money at all. And we have to see this as a global endeavor. So I think that it's a good question. I would hope that we will see virtual meetings taking some of the load, but in the end of the day, experts tell us they have to meet face to face. At that point, it's going to be a call as to how that's funded and how important the work is to each of those sectors. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Another question also for you, I'm afraid, from Martin Cottam, Chair of the Conformity Assessment Policy Committee and Chair of ISO TC 283 Occupational Health and Safety Management. And it reads, the coronavirus pandemic is forcing standards committees to work virtually. While providing some challenges, this is also distinct benefits in enabling full and equal participation by those who cannot afford the cost or time to attend physical meetings. This has potential, for example, to help committee diversity by facilitating participation by representatives from smaller organisations. And in international work, it benefits developing countries, which may be unable to send delegates to physical meetings, It may be tempting for some committees to try to return to their traditional ways of working once the coronavirus situation improves. Do you envisage the NSB and ISO encouraging or requiring committees to maintain a largely virtual way of working for the longer term so these benefits are not lost? A related question to the last one, Scott, if you'd like to.
Yes, and thank you, Martin. Another excellent question. Yes, I do think that we will try to maintain the advantages of the virtual meetings, but yes, people will return to a traditional way of working because our experts tell us that they do need to meet face to face. So I think that the critical point here for us in BSI and for ISO is to realize that a virtual meeting doesn't have the same meeting protocols as a face-to-face. It is even more difficult for some cultures and some individuals to participate in a virtual meeting, whether your photograph is on the screen or your image is on the screen or it's not on the screen and you're trying to raise your hand. Many of us will recognize the challenges that kind of brings. And I think that I would be very sorry if the virtual committee structures were used to resolve matters in committees that really had to be resolved with human people-to-people interaction, because it became an issue discriminating against cultures and individuals who were not able to operate. So I think it means that we need to bring in more guidance for chairs, more guidance for committee managers, to recognize that a virtual meeting is not a physical meeting taking place online. It's a different style of event altogether. And I think the chair role in particular is important to get the best out of virtual meetings. But I suspect that there will be more meetings, because what we've seen from the experience so far is that although committees are working successfully online, they're actually having more meetings rather than simply turning a program of physical meetings into a program of online meetings. So there are more smaller meetings happening, and then we can adapt the time zones and that sort of thing. I think we'll end up with a hybrid, not least because of Rob's earlier question about the cost of international travel for the next few years. But we're definitely working on the guidance and the training that I think we need to bring in to ensure these we get the advantages, but we don't lose the contact which is necessary.
Thank you, Scott. Scott, I'm going to ask you another couple of questions.
Yeah.
And I think we'll go to the formal part of the meeting. These two questions are from Andrea Bedard-Smith, who is chair of the British Standards Society. And I'm going to read them both out, Scott, and you can deal with them briefly together if you don't mind. The first one reads, firstly, I'd like to thank Howard and Scott for their excellent and informative presentations. It's for Scott. On page 33 of the annual report, you say, is now dedicated to supporting clients to implement standards through delivery of technical assistance and consulting. It's very interesting and think users will find it helpful. But those of you who have been associated with BSI for many years will recall that BSI had a technical assistance service a number of years ago. If memory serves me right, and I'm happy to be corrected, the service was closed as it was deemed unfair for the UK NSB to provide help to implement standards to some users, but not to others. So I wondered what is different about this new service. And then, there's another question. In his presentation, Scott mentioned BSI intended to remove boundaries between standards creation and standards use. Could you expand on this vision? There's another one, Andrew. Just come in, Scott, if you can. I'll read this next too. On page 42, there is a graph mapping BSI's activities to the UN SDGs. Under Goal 5, gender equality, all 4 areas of BSI are shown as having minimal alignment with this goal. How can this be correct, given BSI's involvement in the UNECE Declaration on Gender Responsive Standards and aim to remove gender inequality in standards, e.g. seatbelts? If you
okay,
all of those in one go, and then we'll move to the formal parts of the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Andrea. So the first question around technical assistance and consulting. So for me, our function in the standards body is to support the implementation of standards as much as the development and use of standards. So that service was around technical help to exporters at the time, and it was no longer viable, and DTI in fact subsidized that activity. So the support, the technical assistance that was provided from the precedes my time at BSI, Andrea, but it was a technical assistance for exporters. It was a specific function that BSI provided. It was sponsored by the then DTI, who withdrew that. You might argue in a post-transition stage that actually support for exporters was a very good use of public funding, and we will be pleased to talk about it. But the specific activity we're thinking of here is support for organizations far and wide who need advice on how to implement standards, how to develop standard strategies, how standards might benefit their operations. And that's been delivered hitherto. The Excellence International Projects team have done an awful lot of work on technical assistance. But what we've developed in the last year is to pivot that to try and look for areas where industry would benefit from a combination of advice on the standards side from the BSI team, but also from partners working with BSI. So, for example, on building codes in the Middle East has been an interesting recent example. So, helping to support industries, sectors in countries in the UK and overseas, the development of standard strategies, working with Innovate UK. This is all about services, and it's a critical part, I think, Andrea, of how we can help bridge the gap between just seeing standards as a developmental activity and actually getting the real value into society through helping people understand what their benefits are and how to use them. You asked about standards creation and standards use. This is all in the digital transformation of standards development. So moving away from a traditional sort of paper-driven process into a much more content-driven model where we can have communities of interest. I talked about the Digital Built Britain example, which is a pioneering piece of work. We start to have communities of interest. I'd like to think with the hundreds of thousands of people in our communities helping to comment, to think about, to discuss how consensus best practice could advance the issues that they're facing, and these being distilled into specific products, whether they're using the agile capability or whether they're in the formal standards space. And because it's all content driven, then you have a kind of continuous cycle of use and creation going on. So these boundaries disappear, and we no longer have a series activity which lasts years, where you start with an idea, you make a standard, you publish it, you throw it over the wall, you use it, and 5 years later you come back to look at it again. Actually, you're doing it in pretty much real time. And I think that's what our agile capability will allow us to do. And we are going to use that. In fact, we are using that literally this week and from henceforth to help with the development of guidelines for return to work in the post-COVID environment. And if people would like to participate, they need to just let us know. So we want to have this ability to mix creation and use in a much more dynamic way. And then you asked about the diagram of the US SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and that Goal 5, gender equality, was shown BSI as having minimum alignment with this goal. That I think alignment is perhaps not the right word. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and we have to think a little bit about how we can prioritize our areas in this. But this is a critically important part of our work. So from a standards perspective, we see our activity as really covering all 17 of the SDGs. And what we're trying to do here is also think about from a BSI group perspective, where some of this activity is mostly focused. So I think that our work, Stephanie Einen's work on this area, is really fundamental. And I wouldn't take any graph too seriously in that area. It's a fundamental part of our commitment, Andrea. to what we're here to do.
Thank you very much, Scott, and thank you for your questions. It's now 5:10, so we can proceed to the formal business of the meeting, and I will take the notice of the meeting as read. We now turn to the resolutions proposed. To more accurately reflect the views of members, voting today will be done by way of a poll on each of the resolutions put to the meeting, rather than on a show of hands. This has given all members the opportunity to participate in the decision-making of the company and have their votes recorded, despite not being present in person. In addition to the poll votes of the board members, we've counted the votes of the members who have submitted proxy votes to the company in accordance with the procedure described in the notice of the AGM sent to all members on the 8th of April 2020. The number of votes received by proxy for and against each resolution will be shown on the screen. Proxy votes provided at the chairman's discretion have been counted as for, and you should, I hope, now be able to see the votes. You can see the votes for and against and each resolution, and rather than go one by one, I'm able to declare each of the resolutions carried, and thank you very much to all of you who have voted. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes the formal business of this annual general meeting. I would add just one further point. As required by our bylaws, we'll be circulating for your information the membership subscription rates, which will apply from August of this year for renewals and from June for new subscribing members. In the current economic climate, we've decided on a price increase of 1.5% be implemented across membership bands from only 11 and above. It's proposed that no price increase is implemented for bands 1 to 10, which would remain at the 2018 rates. Price rises will affect new members from June 2020 and renewals, as I said, from August 2020. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for all your attending, your questions and your continued support for the company. And I'm now able to declare the 2020 AGM closed. Thank you very much indeed.